Hey everyone, Pete from London Camera Exchange, and you join me today here at Arne Nature Reserve down in Dorset. We have the Canon EOS R5 systems, and we have Dave Newton here as well. You might recognise Dave, or I hope you recognise Dave, from our lockdown Canon live sessions that we've been doing throughout this whole strange period of time. So it's nice to see you face to face, obviously.
Actual face to face. Still a bit of social distancing.
Yeah,
I didn't want to get too close to you.
No, not too close.
You know, just you stay over there. I'll stay over this side. We'll be fine.
But you've been using the R5 for...
I have.
You're probably the most hands-on person I know with this now since it's been released.
Quite possibly. I've been really fortunate. It did have to go back. I was distraught when it went back for a week, but then they sent me another one.
Okay.
So I was very happy again.
Good.
And yeah, I've been shooting with it and quite honestly loving it.
That's good. So you're a freelance photographer, videographer. Is there a technical more?
Not really.
I
use cameras.
You use
and
cameras.
I talk about using cameras, and I write about using cameras, and I teach people how to use cameras. There we go.
As we've seen.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
And you tend to your genre. I mean, you're going to tell me you shoot everything.
I'm gonna tell you I'm genre fluid.
Okay.
So I like to cross all genres. I don't really do weddings.
Right.
I don't officially do weddings. I've done a couple of weddings.
Yep.
But otherwise, pretty much anything goes. So it could be landscape, travel, wildlife, sports, action, portraits, commercial, corporate, day of the week, time of day, mood, it changes.
So you're going to be really quite useful for testing this out in this environment today. So we're going to try and shoot some landscape stuff, hopefully. We're going to shoot some wildlife. What else could we shoot, I suppose?
Maybe some macro, if we can find anything small and buggy to photograph. Obviously, I've got a macro lens with me as well. So it's a really good way of testing out the focus in a macro environment, because that's always a challenge for cameras. And also, if I don't put the camera on a tripod, it's a really good way of looking at how the image stabilization works, because once you get high magnification, any camera shake that you have becomes more obvious. So that's another good test of the camera.
So it's fairly overcast today. There's quite a lot of wind around. Seems every time we meet with the R5 system, when we met with Dave Parry for the first look, it was blowing a hoolie. Today it's kind of the same.
It's pretty breezy today. It is indeed overcast. We haven't had any rain, or I don't think we're going to get any rain.
Don't talk about rain.
I'm hoping we don't get any. Sorry, I've jinxed it now, haven't I? Totally jinxed it. It's pretty overcast, so in terms of like dynamic range testing, there's probably not a lot we can talk about but there are some brighter patches in the sky, and when it's overcast you do get some darker shadow areas as well, so we can give that a go, maybe with a bit of a wider view where possibly you can see how the dynamic range performs. But otherwise, we'll definitely be looking at focus, we'll be looking in camera stabilization, we'll be looking at the resolution. 45 megapixels is spectacular. The amount of detail that it resolves is unbelievable, and I'll hopefully be trying to demonstrate that to you. What else? If we see anything flying, we can maybe look at the frame rate, see how that works. Video as well, we can do a little bit of video as well. It'll really depend on what we find today. So even here, I've got him quite small in the frame, and yet it's picking up an eye and following it as he moves around, even as he jumps across the frame. I'm now shooting the 100-400 2x extender, so I'm at 800mm f11, and it's still picking up the eye. It's So one of the things that I really enjoy about the R5, and it was on the R as well, but it just feels so much nicer here, is how configurable it is in terms of what you do with the buttons. So I'm filming this robin, and the way I've got my buttons set up when filming is that the MFN button, which is the one just to the sort of back left of the shutter button by the main dial, I've configured that to be movie servo AF pause. So I can be have tracking focus on the robin, it's eye detect focus as well, so it's picking up the eye. And if he hops out of frame or I want to pause the focusing so it locks at a distance and doesn't change, I can just tap the MFN button. The focusing box will go grey, and I know that my focus is effectively locked until I push the button again, and it restarts the autofocus. So I've got the autofocus in animal and eye detect, and it's picking up the robin's eye. But it's also, if there were multiple faces in the frame, multiple robins in the frame, I'd be able to move between them. And even right now, the robin's kind of hidden in a bush, so his head's kind of hidden, and yet it's still picking up the eye. I've got the box directly around the eye. So if he turns his head and I get both eyes visible, it also gives me the ability to jump between the two of them to focus on the one that I want to. So we've got a wasp spider down in here. They're a fairly large, very beautiful arachnid. So I've switched over for 100mm macro, and this is the EF 100mm macro. So again, I've got the lens adapter on here, control ring adapter. And we're going to do a bit of macro work. Now, the temptation would be to maybe get a tripod out, but it's on a web. We've got quite a breezy day. It's moving. A tripod's just not going to work very well. So it's a really good test for the image stabilizer as well. So obviously the lens itself has got an image stabilizer. I've got the in-camera stabilizer turned on, and that's helping to keep my camera shake out. Obviously the web is moving a little bit in the breeze, and I can't do an awful lot about that. But the other thing that I really enjoy about the R5, and it was on the R as well, was the flip out screen, because, you know, I'm not necessarily as young as I was now, so getting all the way down can be a little bit awkward. But being able to flip out the screen and still get the camera to the level that I want it to be at is really convenient. Now, because it's a spider, this is not really what the camera considers to be an animal. So I've switched from face tracking, and I'm now in just a single point, actually spot AF, so that I can choose a very defined point to focus on. Combined with using the multi-controller, it allows me to choose my focus point very quickly, work very quickly, and actually, as you can see, working in a handheld capacity is really quite effective, even with a macro subject like this. The image stabilization and just the handling of the camera actually make it a lot easier than it otherwise could be. One thing that would be really nice to do, the camera's got built-in focus bracketing, so you can shoot like up 100 frames, stepping the focus through, which then gives you the ability to stack them all together in editing afterwards, and still shoot your wide open aperture, but get all of that depth of field, and really manipulate what that depth of field looks like. So you can choose the frames that give you just the depth of field where you want it, or indeed all the way through, whatever suits what you want the picture to look like. So within the menu, you've got that focus bracketing option. So you can pick the number of frames that you want. You can pick the increment of focus, so from very fine to very coarse. If you're doing macro subjects like this, then very fine is better. If you're doing a landscape, then very coarse is going to be a better choice. And the camera will take a sequence of images and it will step the focus through shot by shot by shot for you to then composite later. It won't, one thing to be aware of, maybe you've set it to give you 100 frames, it won't necessarily give you 100 frames, you may only get 20. But that will be where it's detected the beginning and end of the subject is, rather than giving you a whole load of frames that you don't need. Particularly at 45 megapixels, you're getting an awful lot of data for every frame. So if you don't need 100 frames, why capture 100 frames? you've got so much in the way of configuration on here with buttons and dials and the like. One of the things, we've got a main control dial, we've got the quick command dial, we've also got this command dial at the back here. And if you're on an RF lens, you've got a control ring adapter as well. You notice on this one, we can actually switch this one ring to either be focus or control ring.
Yeah.
But it's about how you interact with these dials that's really interesting. So you could pick, I don't know, maybe shutter speed up here, seems logical. Aperture could be either one of them, whichever one works for you. Personally, I prefer this up here. And that leaves this as a spare dial. So if we come across to the custom functions, we can find the customized dials option. And I really like having this, not control ring, having this quick control dial 1 to be my focus point mode selection.
Nice. Yeah.
So not AF point selection, that's what we're going to do up here on the joystick, but this allows me to now jump between the different modes. So if you want to go face tracking, spot, single point, expansion 1, 2, zone, and more zone, it's a really quick way of jumping between those modes. And then what we do is we come back into the menu and you go to the customized buttons, and if we scroll down we can find the multi-controller direct, which is this one here, and it only has one option, which is direct AF point selection. So now you can move your AF point around with the joystick, you can switch your modes with the quick dial, and then you've got your shutter speed and aperture up here.
So it's totally customizable as a setup to your personal preference.
Exactly, however you want to work with it. And one really nice thing, not a lot of people have found this one, but we can set the aperture value to be adjustable in 1/8 of a stop increments. So if you wanted to ramp your exposure whilst filming, instead of moving in 3rd stops where it can be a little bit stuttery, it's quite a big exposure change, you can move it in 8 stop increments instead, so you get a much smoother ramp of your exposure. It's particularly good if you've got the camera set to manual. So we've got to this point in the reserve where we've got a little bit of a high point. Unfortunately, we've not really been blessed with great light today, so there's no spectacular pictures in terms of a landscape to be had, but we've got this lovely rolling landscape and a big bright white sky. Now normally I would reach for my ND grad filters, so I'd reach for HMY filters. I'd put an ND grad on here, maybe it was maybe it'd be a 2-stop hard grad probably, because I've got a fairly defined horizon line. I could probably get away with a hard grad. But with the R5, I don't necessarily need to, because I've got the ability to shoot in HDR PQ. Now, HDR PQ, it's called the PQ curve, or the PQ quantization curve, and it tries to mimic the way the human eye sees brightness and color. And we can set it in the camera and it gives us an HDR capability. Now, the cameras have had HDR for quite a while, where the camera would capture 3 images and you could choose your bracketing amount, so 1, 2 or 3 stops, and exactly how they were put together, and then it would composite them in camera. But the HDR PQ option means you just take 1 image, and effectively instead of shooting in your RAW or JPEG, you're shooting in what we call an HEIF format. We first saw this on the 1DX Mark III, and it's been ported to the R5, and it allows you to capture these higher dynamic range scenes. So I set it in the camera, it's in the red menu. It's red menu number 2, so it's HDR PQ, and I'm going to turn that on. And you do get a little warning. It says we recommend you turn highlight tone priority to enable, so D+, which is going to give you a bit more tonal range in the highlights, because typically that's where you're going to want your dynamic range to be, is up in those highlight areas. Particularly a scene like this where we've got this gate, 5-bar gate, rolling landscape, and then this really bright sky. It's that bright area where I want to try and keep as much dynamic range or as much tonal gradation as I possibly can. So I've set that, and I'm basically ready to go. I just set my exposure as I normally would, and I can capture the image. Now I still want to try and avoid the highlights being blown, because if they're blown, they're still going to be blown, but effectively it's pulling everything in, and with the histogram, we can see that live. So we can see where it looks like we're losing the top end, but actually you're gaining the top end. It just gives you an area to set your exposure in effectively. Basically, when you shoot in an HDR format like this, you don't necessarily want to shoot it really bright. You shoot it a bit darker and you let the tones spread out. So I'm all set up and I'm ready to shoot, but this is also a great opportunity for me to talk about this thing that's on the front of the lens, front of the camera. So this is a 24mm tilt and shift lens. I'm a big fan of tilt and shift lenses for landscapes. This thing around here is it's called a Rigetti TSE frame. Everyone seems to want to know what the silver thing around my lens is, so that's what it is. Normally I would use this on a tripod, and this gives me the ability to adjust the camera or lens. Actually, it's the camera that I get to move. That goes up and down, but the lens stays where it is. So the reason I love a tilt and shift lens, if I was to look at this picture from pretty much where I want to take it from, let's say it was this kind of height, I've basically got foreground and sky, because the top of the 5-bar gate is pretty much in line with the horizon. Now, totally I can bring the camera up, but if I bring the camera up, I then lose the bottom of the gate. My only solution with a normal lens, a wide angle lens for example, would be to tilt the camera down like this. And as I tilt the camera down, that gate falls outwards. So the front vertical of this gate is going to lean out to the left and the back vertical is going to lean out to the right. And that's a look that I just don't like. It really bugs me. Tilt shift lens means I can pick where I want to be. So I'm going to say I probably want to be up here, which gives me the space between the top of the gate and the horizon. It allows me effectively to create a midground. So instead of just having foreground and sky or foreground and background, I actually have a balanced composition of foreground, midground, and background. And then I've ridden the camera up, which means I've lost the bottom of the gate, but I can use the shift function. Here, you might be able to see that the lens is braking at this point, shifting here. Now I still want to keep the camera pointing level. I don't want to be tilting it up or down, because otherwise I get that parallax or the converging verticals. So I still keep the camera nice and level, and I pick my height. There we go. Make sure everything's squared up, and I can shoot. And now, instead of having an image where everything's leaning out and all the perspective looks weird, or where I have no composition at all, I've just got a 50-50 composition. Instead, I can have a composition where there is that foreground, midground, and background. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go into the menu now, and I go into the blue menu, which is the playback menu. And as long as you're shooting RAW and JPEG, you can do this in camera. So I go to the blue menu, I can choose HEIF to JPEG conversion. It shows me the picture that I've taken. I choose set. It does the conversion. I say yes, save it as a new file. What you'll see is this is the picture as it was taken, the RAW file, and this is the picture that's the HEIF converted to JPEG. You can see the difference. If I just flip between the two of them, you can see how all of the detail in that sky, as I said, it looked like a white sky, but actually there is detail in there, and it's all been held in that HEIF conversion, in that HEIF file format. And in fact, now the sun's come out, I can do it again, and I can have a bit more of an interesting light on the gate. Look at that. All that rambling gave me time for the sun to pop out. There we go. So now it should be a slightly more, hopefully, dramatic result, he says, as the sun disappears back in again. And, oh, we just caught the edge of that cloud. And there we go. That's, you know, I don't think that the HEIF format is going to replace ND grads in my bag. Far from it. I'm still going to be using ND grads. I think in a pinch like this, if you wanted to be quick, you wouldn't necessarily need to reach for your grads, or potentially using it with grads as well, which is going to give you an even more expanded dynamic range. I think that's potentially going to be a really good solution for many situations. So we're just going to try something a little different. It's one of my favourite Frankenstein setups. So I've got 100mm macro here, complete with the control ring adapter. I've got a 2x extender and I'm going to put the two of them together. Unfortunately, the front of the extender, you can see, sticks out and it won't fit into the back of the macro lens. So I'm also going to have to take an extension tube like this, fit it between them, and I'm just going to take the 12mm, so the shortest one, and that's going to give me quite a large amount of magnification, probably somewhere around 2.5 times to 1. So put this down here. Basically, the extension tube, obviously, it allows closer focus, but it's also going to create the physical space for the extender to fit on the back of the macro lens. And then we shall take this all off here and we'll fit it to the R5. Now, one of the things to remember with the R5 is turn it off before taking the lens off, and then you do get a nice cover that goes across the sensor, stops it getting all dusty and dirty, particularly in a windy environment. Okay, so that's there. Let's get the cap back on and we'll go find something macro. So we found a bit of a wasp's nest in a fallen tree, and it seems like a really good opportunity to do a little bit of more high frame rate filming. And so I'm at 100 frames a second, 4K, DCI 4K. I'm at quite high ISO because it's actually surprisingly dark in here, and as I showed you, I've got that weird combination of lens on here, so I've probably got quite a lot of magnification, but also quite a bit of working distance. And it's a good test for the image stabilizer because I'm kind of hand holding, although I'm braced against a tree. And I'm filming at 6400 ISO. I'm at 100th of a second and at f4, and just waiting for some wasps to come in and go out and give me some motion. Oh, that was nice. That was really nice. Let's have a little look at this. Towards the end, here we go. This little guy decided to. There's like a sentry, and he's just watching what's going on as they come in. See where this high frame rate really comes into its own. 100 frames a second. You get that lovely slow motion feel of the wasps in flight. And in terms of my shutter speed, I said I'm at 100th of a second, so I'm at 100 frames a second as well. So I've just matched, because it's so dark. Going up to 200th of a second would probably have been a bit of a challenge to get any light in there. I'd have had to have gone even higher on the ISO. But you know, it's okay to match your shutter speed to your frame rate occasionally. So one of the lovely things about the autofocus is how effective it is and how it just works, but also it goes into the story of how configurable the camera is. So I mentioned that I have my MFN button configured for start and stop servo AF in movie. So if you want to do a focus pull, for example, you can touch screen or you can use the joystick to move your focus point around. I quite like the touch screen when I'm filming a bit more like this, so I can pick my point here. But now let's say I wanted to focus pull through to the background. You notice that the box is currently grey. That means that focus is turned off. As soon as I flip the MFN button, it turns on and it just does that lovely smooth focus pull through to the background. Now, what makes this even more useful is not just that you've got the ability to focus pull and control it, but you can control the speed of the focus pull. So if I come across to the AF menu, and I work my way across to the movie servo AF speed, I can choose my speed from slow to fast. So you see at the moment I've got it set fairly slow. This is where I quite like it. But if you wanted a really fast focus ramp, if we put it to default, and I show you that again, if I turn this off, or I bring it back up here, there you go. And then we go back the other way, you get a much faster focus ramp. So to facilitate a focus pull, where normally you might have a focus puller, for example, you don't need that. You can use the autofocus system of the camera to do your focus pulls for you. It makes workflow on set so much quicker and easier, and highly repeatable as well. It simplifies that whole shooting process. here. Terrible picture of an Osprey, but the fact that I can resolve it, it's an 800mm lens effectively. There's an egret just coming up here. I think it's an egret, a white bird, and I'm going to see how this gets on. We've got the 100-400 with a 2x extender, and I'm in high speed continuous, and I'm face tracking, or face and eye tracking. I'm not convinced it'll get an eye, but it's tracking the bird. It's tracking a white bird against a white sky at 800mm f11. And let's have a look. Well, there's one frame, so you can see how small it is in the frame. It's actually still quite distant, and yet I hope, look at that. See all of the detail. That's really surprisingly sharp. That's one of the benefits, both the 45 megapixels, but also the AF system of the camera. It just seems to lock on. Even that's a quite challenging white on white, and it still seems to have nailed it.
So internally you can shoot 8K video, which is pretty phenomenal.
Yes, and not just 8K, but 8K RAW.
Yeah.
So RAW video internal in 8K. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty spectacular. And I guess it makes people think that this is a video camera that shoots stills, which it's really not. This is a stills camera that has really great video functionality. And I think there's like a mindset change that needs to happen at the moment. Obviously, we see a lot of noise about the R5 on the internet at the moment, and I think fundamentally people have just got it wrong. They all seem to think that this is a video camera. It's not. If you want a video camera, just buy a video camera. It does great video, but as I've said to people in the past on a multitude of video training sessions, yes, you can put a nail in with the back end of a screwdriver. It works, but it's maybe not the best thing to use for it. So if you want to film an interview, maybe don't use a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. Maybe use a video camera, which is what's designed for that task. And I think people just need to get their head around that and realize this is a stills camera with great video features.
Obviously, a lot of the noise online is around the overheating issues and concerns, I suppose, that people have, and whether it can actually handle the sort of performance that, you know, Canon have said it can do. Have you personally managed to make it overheat? And yeah, I have. I think, you know, there's no denying the fact that it can overheat. It will overheat. If you shoot 8K RAW, it'll overheat. If you shoot 4K 100 frames a second, at some point it's going to overheat. But what you've got to remember is that, again, it's a stills camera. It's got no active cooling. No.
So if you had active cooling, you get holes in the body shell, fans, all of that kind of stuff. Suddenly it gets bigger, looks more like a video camera, doesn't do stills as well, isn't as weather sealed. Bear in mind, this is as weather sealed as a 5D Mark IV. So taking it out in the rain isn't really a problem. Yeah, go slash holes in it, cool it down some more, put a fan in there, but then don't ever take it out when the weather gets slightly bad. And yeah, as I say, it will overheat. You've got a lot of data going through the processor. You've got a sensor working very hard, and you're shooting 8K RAW or 4K high frame rate, you're recording to the CF Express card. And if you've ever taken a CF Express card out, even after you've transferred data off it, it will be hot.
Yeah.
Guaranteed. There's physics, right? You can't stop it getting hot. So it's going to get warm in there. But again, I think it's people fundamentally missing the point. This is not a camera that you'll record long interviews with. It would be mind-numbing to try and record an interview in 8K RAW. Who the hell wants to be seen in 8K RAW? I certainly don't. You know, I'm going to look 150 years old. So I don't know what these people want to do with 8K RAW. But yes, I get the point. It can and it will overheat if you're recording for a long period of time. Can you manage that in your filming? Yes. Again, is it a video camera? No. And that's the long and short of it. And I think people have got their knickers in a twist about it because, I don't know, maybe just the noise on the web is so great because the demand is so big for this camera that everyone wants this holy grail that
suits every need that they want.
Exactly. But, from a physics perspective, the heat's got to go somewhere.
Yeah.
It's a small body. Yes, it's a magnesium alloy body shell, so it's going to dissipate heat quite well. But as I said, there's no holes in it. There's no fans. It's going to get warm. And you just manage that in the way of filming. And is it frustrating when it overheats? Absolutely, it is, because you're like, I'm in the middle of something or whatever. But that's just not managing the kit that you've got available to you and working with it in the best way possible. And realizing that while it can do this stuff over here, which is amazing, there are limitations. And understanding that and working with that is probably one of the key things that people need to get their head around. So some beautiful colours here. We're still in summer, but it's almost like autumn colours are starting to appear. So we've got some really lovely reds of the berries and reds of the leaves up against the vibrant greens. Really looks beautiful. Just caught my eye as we're walking back through the car park. And one of the things that I really like about Canon is their colour science and their colours generally. You can be very subjective about colours and people will prefer colours from different cameras, but fundamentally Canon colours are pretty much one of the most accurate in the business. Their colours look great straight out of the camera, and because of the picture styles and the way the picture style programming is done, if you shoot with one picture style, let's call it fine detail or landscape, on one camera, and you do the same on another camera, the colours are going to look the same. Obviously, white balance notwithstanding and exposure notwithstanding, your colours are going to look the same. And that means if you've got a couple of different cameras in your arsenal, you can move between them and know that they're going to match up really nicely. So it's one of the little benefits that people don't really think about or talk about, but actually in a workflow, particularly in a professional situation where you might have a couple of cameras, it can make life just that bit easier. And fundamentally, it's all about making life as easy as you can. Photography is hard enough as it is. There's no sense making it any harder than it needs to be.
So we've come to the end of the day now. It's all getting a little bit darker. It's also still nice and windy for us, but it's been really great just to get hands-on really with this R5 and kind of be able to see those features that we spoke about with Dave Parry and obviously get that sort of knowledge from you, from sort of your experience of using it for so long now. For me, the megapixel range, the focusing on here, especially in video mode, is phenomenal. So easy to use. I'm not a native Canon user myself, but yeah, being able to pick it up and use it, and also without a strap with that massive deep grip as well, throughout the whole day has been really great. I think from my perspective, asking you as someone who uses this and will use this a lot more, obviously, if you had to tell someone on the outside just maybe 1 or 2 points which really summarizes the camera to you, what would they be? Major
I think be? I mean, as you've kind of highlighted, there are so many points. If I had to sum it up, I would just say it's probably the most versatile camera out there. I think, whatever you want to shoot, be it travel, landscape, wildlife, portraits, commercial, corporate, weddings, sports, it will do all of it. And it may not be the very best camera in any one of those areas. It will probably be pretty close to being the best in a couple of them, but it will do all of them very capably. So if you're looking for a one camera system, then it's a great option. If you're going to have multiple cameras, then it still has a place in the bag because it can cover everything as a main camera, while you might have a more specialist backup camera or second camera perhaps. I think the fact that it can do stills at 45 megapixels, that resolution is just beautiful. The amount of detail, as you've seen today, the amount of detail that it renders when we're doing macro, or if we're doing a landscape or a bit of wildlife, you've seen, like even with the Osprey that was so far away that I still managed to be able to see it. It's not a particularly good picture, because it's half a mile away, but you can still zoom in and see it, and that's what 45 megapixels gives you. In terms of its ISO performance, It's definitely better than the R was, not as good as the R6, but that's because it's got more resolution. So your choice between those two is, do you want lower resolution and better ISO performance, or do you want higher resolution and not quite, and it's only minor, just not quite as good ISO performance? I think, yeah, as I say, summing it up, it would be, it's the most versatile camera out there. It will do everything really, really well, and it will be so configurable to you and how you want to work. And you said you're not a native Canon shooter.
No, not at all.
So, you know, you've enjoyed using it. If you, it's the $1 million question, if you were going to go and buy a camera system, so I said to you, there is a bundle of money, would you go and buy this camera?
It would certainly be very high on top of the list. Whether it'll be the end one I go for, I don't know. But certainly it ticks so many boxes for me. My problem is I'm obviously using a lot of cameras on a near weekly, monthly basis, and it's always the latest tech for me.
Yeah.
So having real hands-on time with this and feeling very comfortable, and for me, massive, like, focusing is so important to me. If something's not in focus for me, I mean, I might as well just give up.
Yeah,
you know,
what's the point?
Especially in video. And just having that joystick on the back, and then all those selections, you know, and it was quick, and it locked on, and it just held it. And yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it.
Good.
So it's been really great. Thanks for spending the day with us.
Absolute pleasure.
Hopefully we can do something else like this again soon, or I'm sure you'll be live streaming to all of our followers shortly.
I hope so. We'll probably get some more of those arranged. So let us know what you want. I keep saying this at the end of every live stream. You tell us what you'd like us to cover in the next one, and we'll see what we can do. I think we're looking at maybe doing some more location-y bits that we may run as a pre-recorded video, and then with a live aspect afterwards, which is going to mean we're not confined to my kitchen or my office,
Yeah.
but we can actually do something on location. So I think that might be the next one. So let us know what you'd like to see me shoot on location and give you advice about, and we'll try and make it happen.
But until then, if you'd like any more information on the EOS R5, obviously click on the link below, or head into your local London Camera Exchange.